Good morning, everybody. Hope you're doing well today. Welcome to the Metro Area Snapshot series about the New Orleans metro area. I'm Sarah Bronin, and I founded the National Zoning Atlas, and it's my job, as always, to kick off our webinar today. We're joined by two of our analysts, Manal Bawazir and David Longo, who will introduce themselves when they talk, and I'm really excited to get started. The outline of the presentation today is pretty basic. We're going to talk a little bit about why we made the zoning atlas, how it's made. We're going to get a tour of the zoning atlas using all of our nifty features. Then we're going to get to the meat of the presentation, how the metro area zones, and also the NZA in action. So just very briefly, very big picture, the NZA is an online interactive map documenting information about zoning. We certainly log information about non-residential uses as well, but we focus on information about housing rules. So things like how much process is required before a certain type of housing, single family or multifamily, might be allowed, how big lot sizes have to be, whether there are parking mandates, how we treat accessory dwelling units, and a lot more. We do this because zoning has a significant impact on our economy, on our environment, on society as a whole. And we know that there has never been a resource that has logged zoning in the detail that we log it, and also with the breadth that we log it. And speaking of breadth, I point you to our homepage for the map when you open it at zoningatlas.org/atlas, and you'll get a lot more information about the map during the tour. But this shows that we've completed 16 states along with DC, and we've also had a significant amount of coverage in many other states as well. On this map, everywhere that's gray shows those places that we've confirmed don't have zoning. Everywhere that is purple shows those places where we have confirmed there is zoning and we've logged it. And everywhere that's white shows places that we just quite haven't gotten to yet, but we hope to very soon. And you can see down in the New Orleans, where it says New Orleans on the map, the place that we're going to zoom into for today. Before we do that, I just wanted to give a quick summary of the national progress that we've made so far. So on that map, all those little purples and grays add up to 9,800 jurisdictions. That covers 57% of the population of the country, 60% of the land area, and a total of 105,000 plus published zoning districts. That means we've read over 1 million pages of zoning codes and extracted information about how over 105,000 zoning districts treat all of the different regulatory factors and variables that we extract from the zoning codes. So to hear more about that process, we're going to turn next to how it's made. And I believe Manal is covering this. So Manal, take it away.
Thank you, Sarah. I am Manal Bawazir, a zoning code analyst at the NZA. I have worked on analyzing zoning data in a number of states, including Virginia, North Carolina, and Utah. I would like to take a moment to briefly explain the NZA methodology. Analysis begins by identifying jurisdictions. These are cities, counties, and towns with zoning authority. Here we see some of the 15 parishes with the right to exercise zoning in the New Orleans Metairie CBSA. Once we have identified that a jurisdiction is zoned, we collect the two main components of a complete zoning code, the zoning text and the zoning map. Both are necessary. While the zoning ordinance contains a lot of key information, we also need to know where its provision apply throughout the jurisdiction and how much land is allocated to each use. Here we see the zoning text and map for the St. John the Baptist Parish. Each jurisdiction with zoning is made up of zoning districts with different regulations. Here's a screenshot of the 19 zoning district in the West St. John the Baptist Parish as they appear in the NZA editor. You can see the district names along with the type of district ranging from primarily residential to non-residential. Most districts in this particular list are base district, which are the base classification on the zoning map. But there are also overlay districts, which are districts that overlap one or more base districts to provide additional regulation in line with the objective of the overlay. Here we have highlighted the major corridor overlay districts. With a complete code, team members then follow two work streams per jurisdiction: text analysis and geospatial analysis. The text analyst first identifies the list of districts and logs key data points using NZA's standardized methodology. The geospatial analyst locates its zoning districts and, depending on the available format, either digitize a static PDF map or standardizes existing geospatial data. The two work streams work hand in hand to create the zoning districts as they appear for each jurisdiction on the atlas. Zoning analysts record up to 200 data points for each district. Key elements include the type of housing permitted, from single family to 4 or more multi-family housing, and whether these homes are allowed as of right or require a public hearing. Analysts also log minimum lot sizes, setbacks, building heights, parking requirements, affordable housing provisions, accessory dwelling unit regulation, and much more. I will now turn it over to David to discuss how you can use the NZA.
Thanks, Manal. My name is David. I'm one of the geospatial analysts with the NZA, and I've worked on zoning maps in states including Oklahoma, New York, Maine, and of course, Louisiana. I'm also from New Orleans, so I'm very excited to get to talk about it today. Now that we've covered some of the basics of our methodology, we're going to walk through how to use the interactive map and get the most out of its features. If you'd like to follow along with me, you can head to this URL shown on the slide, zoningatlas.org/atlas. So first, we're going to take a look at the map on a national scale. In the legend and layer options box in the upper left corner, you can see a few options to toggle on and off additional layers and features. You can also change the base map here. You can see that the legend highlights the zone status of a given jurisdiction, with purple representing zone jurisdictions and gray representing unzoned jurisdictions. The areas in white have not yet been analyzed and integrated into the NZA. If you have the tribal land and protected land layers toggled on, you can also see those in green and sort of a greenish brown layer. These are more prominent in the western states. So first, we can use the zoom and filter box to explore a chosen geography. When we select Louisiana in the state dropdown, the map zooms to that state. And now that we're zoomed into Louisiana, we're able to get even more specific with our geography selection. So we can select the Orleans-Metairie area in the metro/micropolitan area dropdown. We could select Orleans Parish in the county dropdown, or we could select New Orleans in the jurisdiction dropdown. And as you can see on your screens, the map zoomed to New Orleans and outlined the jurisdiction in black. It's important to note, however, that you can only select one jurisdiction at a time. So at the scale, you can notice that the legend has updated to show zoning district types, and with light purple indicating primarily residential districts, dark purple areas indicating areas that are mixed with residential, and tan areas indicating non-residential districts, which typically allow things like industrial manufacturing, airports, or open space. So you can get a lot of information just from that basic overview of the NZA map, but a lot of the most valuable insights come from using some of the filters that you can access on the atlas. So first, you can look at the Show Me Where People Can Build box, which has options for quick filtering. For example, it can show where missing middle housing or apartments are allowed. In this case, we've toggled on the single family homes filter, and you can see that the map has lost some of its color. The areas that remain colored in are where the criteria satisfy the selected filters. So in other words, this means that you can build a single family home anywhere where the map is still light or dark purple. And in the lower right-hand corner, you can see that the filtering results box has calculated the zone acres and number of districts that satisfy our current criteria. According to these results, 52% of zoned acres in New Orleans, or 40% of zoned districts, allow single family housing by right. It's important to note that the filtering results only apply calculations for this single selected jurisdiction. So in this case, just New Orleans, not the whole CBSA. Now, going back to the show me where people can build box at the top left corner, we've now toggled on where apartments with 4 or more units can be built. And you can see that the change you can see that there's a change in the location that meet that criteria. The filtering box has also changed to 18% of zoned acres or 37% of the zoning districts. This is a really sharp disparity between where single family and multifamily housing is permitted, and it's readily apparent if you toggle back and forth between these two filters. In addition to filtering zoning data, you can also toggle on or off tribal land, protected land, and FEMA flood zones, which of course is particularly important for the New Orleans metro area. So this layer allows users to see how flood risks line up with different zoning regulations. Now, getting a little more specific, we're going to look at the advanced filters box, where you can select more specific filtering criteria, like whether a 1, 2, 3, or 4 plus family housing is also subject to a public hearing, minimum parking requirement, or height caps, among other options. In this case, we selected criteria where 1 family housing is allowed as of right and has a maximum lot size of 2,000 square feet, which is some of the smallest lot sizes we've ever seen. According to our filtering results, only 10% of zoned acres in New Orleans satisfied these criteria. Here we've selected where up to 3 family housing is allowed as of right. And according to our filter results, roughly 20% of zoned land allows 3 family housing. It seems to be mostly concentrated around the Marigny and the 9th Ward. And in contrast, when we go down to only where 2 family housing is allowed as of right, we see a lot more purple, and most of Uptown and Mid-City gets highlighted. And I think the difference between how much 2 family and 3 family housing is allowed as of right is pretty interesting, and this is not something we see all the time. We can't determine the origin of this pattern just from our data, but I think it's fair to imagine that this might have something to do with historic architectural patterns in the city, namely the prevalence of duplex-style buildings like double shotgun houses. And I just think it's interesting that in addition to the zoning data and its impacts on housing directly, you can glean all sorts of different things about land use characteristics from the NZA. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Manal, who's going to talk more about how New Orleans zones.
Thank you, David. Now that we are more familiar with the atlas and database, let's examine how the New Orleans Metairie CBSA zones. To clarify, a CBSA, or Core-Based Statistical Area, is a census term that describes regional urban areas. As mentioned earlier, the New Orleans CBSA comprises 15 parishes. Of the total 15 parishes, only 1 does not have zoning and 1 has a missing code. Our team analyzed almost 2,800 pages of zoning ordinance text and looked up to 200 data points for each of the 347 districts. That makes up the zoned land of the New Orleans Metairie area. We found an average of 27 districts per jurisdiction and an average of 215 pages per zoning code. To put this in context, the national average pages of zoning code per jurisdiction is 180 pages, and the national average number of zoning districts is 17 districts. So this is a lot more in the New Orleans CBSA area. Now let's break down the share of land categories across the New Orleans CBSA. 60% of land across the CBSA is subject to zoning, 38% is general unzoned land, and the remaining 2% is protected land. Of the 60% zoned land across the CBSA, most of it allows for housing. That is broken down into three types of zoning districts. We say that primarily residential districts are those that are primarily focused on providing housing, while 47% of zone land in the New Orleans CBSA is primarily residential. About 20% of zoned land is classified as mixed with residential. This is an unusually high percentage of mixed with residential districts, which are districts that allows for both residential uses and residential uses. An example of this is downtown districts. And lastly, 1/3 of zoned land across the state is limited to non-residential uses, such as industrial, institutional, or open space. Now let's take a moment to dig into the zoning specific of residential development in the New Orleans CBSA. For this presentation, we define multi-housing as residence with 4 or more units. This table shows the share of residential land zoned for different type of housing. From left to right, there are columns for 1, 2, 3, and 4 or more family housing. The darker blue represents the percentage of housing allowed by rights, and the lighter blue represents the percentage of housing that require public hearing, and gray is prohibited. So as we can see, 91% of land allowing residential development across the CBSA allows 1 unit per lot by right. That means single-family housing can be built on most residential land in the New Orleans Metairie CBSA. Now compare this to the 2-family column, which drops down to 35% allowed by right, as 5% is allowed subject to a public hearing. Now 4 or more unit apartments are only allowed by right on 27% of the CBSA's residential land. We see they are allowed on another 5% of land after a public hearing. But these discretionary legal processes add costs, time, and uncertainties that can discourage projects altogether. So in many cases, public hearings can, in effect, function as a form of probation. Speaking of probation, the large gray bar shows the most common approaches to 4 or more family housing in the CBSA. That is to say, multifamily housing is prohibited entirely on 67% of residential land across the CBSA. Let's turn to another important zoning regulation, minimum lot sizes. These rules set the smallest amount of land on which a home can be built. Lot sizes are regulated in terms of either square feet or acres. But these minimums can often be quite large, which effectively mandates unsustainable land-intensive development patterns that fuel sprawl, drive up housing costs, and limit who can afford to live in a community. As a quick note for this presentation, we use 40,000 square feet and 1 acre interchangeably because 40,000 square feet is such a common minimum lot size that it's sometimes referred to as builder's acre. A big round number like 40,000 simplifies calculation and it rolls off the tongue easier than the true acre size of 43,560 square feet. But in effect and intention, they're basically the same. So this donut chart shows a breakdown of minimum lot size required for single-family zoned land across the states. The darker the green, the larger the required lot size. So most land allowing single-family housing requires only 10,000 square feet. The CBSA actually has some of the smallest minimum lot sizes we have ever seen. Districts with large lot size are typically agricultural, rural, or resource protection type districts that may allow limited residential uses. But even the CBSA's rural residential zones, there are no minimum lot size over 1 acre. And now I'm gonna pass it back to David.
Thanks, Manal. So up next, we're going to talk about accessory dwelling units or ADUs. These are secondary homes located on the same lot as a primary residence, and ADUs are gaining popularity as a cheaper, flexible, and meaningful way to expand housing options in communities across the country. This donut shows ADU permissions on single-family zoned land across the New Orleans metro. The darkest orange is the most permissive, lightest orange is the least permissive, and gray means it's prohibited. ADUs are allowed on only 16% of single-family land in the CBSA and prohibited on 84%. This number is actually lower for the city of New Orleans specifically, with ADUs allowed on only 9% of residential land by right. This is one of the most extreme restrictions we have seen on ADUs in our work to date. Many cities and states have enacted pro-ADU legislation in recent years, which we like to keep track of so that we can update our figures accordingly. However, we have not so far found a similar push for ADU reform in Louisiana when we were constructing this map. Finally, we're going to look at parking mandates. Parking, as you all probably know, consumes a lot of valuable land and can be expensive to build, making it an important regulation to track because those added costs can deter new housing. In the New Orleans CBSA, 93% of residential land has rules requiring off-street parking. These regulations apply across our 1, 2, 3, and 4 or more family housing treatments. One of the great things about all this data is that we can visualize it in a lot of different ways. And we've actually developed a tool called zoning snapshots, which allow anyone to pull up the graphics that you've seen today in this presentation and generate them yourself. If you're interested in exploring zoning stats for any location in the NZA or creating your own graphics, I encourage you to look at our zoning snapshots tool, which you can get to at this URL on the slide. So a zoning snapshot is basically just a visual summary of any jurisdiction, county or parish, or metro/micropolitan area or state that we've published to the NZA. To use the zoning snapshots, you first select the place that you want to see in one of these drop-down menus. In the county/parish filter in the middle, you can select a full county or parish, and all of the jurisdictions in that area will appear. For example, if I use this filter and selected Jefferson Parish, we'll see stats for every jurisdiction in the parish summarized together. If I go to the metropolitan area filter on the right and selected the Orleans Metairie CBSA, then I'd get the combined statistics for all of the jurisdictions that we've been talking about in this presentation. I think it's really interesting to compare a jurisdiction with its county/parish and CBSA. As an example, here are some snapshots for the city of New Orleans on the left and the New Orleans Metairie CBSA on the right. We also have included Orleans Parish here, but of course, since Orleans Parish is concurrent with New Orleans, the numbers are identical. With these snapshots, you can easily review key zoning statistics for different geographies at a glance. And looking at the purple bar, you can see that New Orleans and its CBSA have a similar mix of primarily residential land in light purple, mixed-use residential in dark purple, and non-residential land in tan. Looking at the blue chart right below it, which shows permitted housing units, we can see that New Orleans allows multifamily housing on more of its residential land compared to the whole metro. However, New Orleans is also more likely to require public hearings for multifamily housing, which can greatly inhibit the practical development of housing. And finally, looking at the bottom two figures, I think we really see where New Orleans diverges with its CBSA. On the left, in green, we have one-family minimum lot sizes, and the city's minimum lot size requirements are really lax, as Manal discussed, with all land requiring less than 10,000 square feet or no minimum at all. Compare this to the CBSA, where roughly 30% of single-family housing has some more restrictive minimum lot size. On the other hand, looking at the bottom right, we can see that the New Orleans ADU zoning is much more restrictive. Only 6% of single-family land allows ADUs, compared to 24% for the whole CBSA. You can generate your own zoning snapshots by going to zoningatlas.org/snapshots. And with that, I will pass it back down to Sarah.
Great. So I'm going to talk briefly about how you might use the National Zoning Atlas in your work in New Orleans. First, we have used the zoning atlas and other places to understand residential segregation, both by race and ethnicity as well as income. A report that we did with the Urban Institute a couple of years ago features the Connecticut zoning atlas data, finding that zoning correlates with whiteness, wealth, and education levels. Exclusionary zoning in particular. We also have used the zoning atlas and other places to understand flood risk as it relates to zoned capacity. A report that we co-authored with the Regional Plan Association looked at this exact question in metropolitan New York City, including New York City, Westchester County, and Long Island, finding that that area had largely underzoned for the kind of housing that they need to create, not only to meet current housing demand, but also to offset the housing that would be lost as a result of sea level rise. We've also been really glad to see the National Zoning Atlas used in different media and public fora. So we've found that reporters and people who are interested in understanding, bloggers, people who are interested in understanding how zoning is working, can go to our media page. The URL is at the bottom, and help their audiences understand what zoning does. And I also wanted to flag, especially given the rich history that is in the New Orleans city itself, but also the broader metro area, a project that we're working on, the National Preservation Atlas, which is at preservationatlas.org. We just launched that last week. And what we are doing with that project is we are identifying where historic properties are located, what types of historic properties there are in terms of whether they are districts or buildings or structures or sites or objects, and what their significance is. And we're making that available to people, just like we made the zoning information available to people through an interactive website. We've got Connecticut up and we've got Nevada up. Virginia is our next state we announced last week, and maybe soon we'll come to Louisiana, but stay posted on that for that resource. And we can look in the future at zoning and preservation and how they interact. With that, I know there's a couple of questions in the chat. I'll just ask you to support or use the NZA to support your data-driven planning and advocacy. We built it so that you could use it. And feel free too to follow us on social media, where you can keep up with the latest, whether it's in the New Orleans region or beyond. So with that, I know we only have a couple minutes, and so I'll toss the first question over to Manal. If you guys want to just come back in, and I have two quick questions. One is, it looks like some jurisdictions didn't provide their zoning information. How can they legally withhold this? Manal, what's been your experience in making sure that we have all jurisdictions giving us their zoning codes?
I would say that it varies from place to place, but my experience has been that usually jurisdictions are pretty responsive, but in some cases we had to basically do a FOIA request with certain smaller jurisdictions that were not necessarily responsive, and we've had some luck for that, but unfortunately this was not the case with this one jurisdiction that we were missing in the specific area. And it happens sometimes that jurisdictions just do not, give us their code, and yeah, we just kind of publish the jurisdiction and include a note that it has zoning, but unfortunately we did not have enough information to do the analysis.
Great. And we had a second question about parking, and it looks like maybe our parking filter isn't working exactly correctly on the screenshot, so we'll make sure that that's updated. But the CBD and historic districts do exempt from the parking mandates, so that should have shown up in the no parking filter. So check the map later today, it will be updated. We may not have forced the update overnight as we normally do. But we will say New Orleans across all of their zoning districts, as you point out, does also exempt small multifamily affordable housing dwellings. So thanks for that careful review of our screenshots. we'll update that. It doesn't look like we have time for any more questions. David, any last words as our New Orleans resident before we close?
No, I think we all covered it. I guess if anyone knows anyone in Plaquemines Parish who can send us their zoning text, I think that's the one we were missing. That'd be great. But otherwise, I think we covered everything.
All right, so there's our call to action for those viewing today and those viewing in the future if you still see a white spot in that parish on our map. So thanks everybody for joining us, and we will see you again for our next webinar. Bye-bye.